تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. اللهم ذكرنا ما نسينا وعلمنا ما جهلنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من حال أهل النار. بالله تعالى. I praise Allah and glorify Him and thank Him for all the blessings that He gives without Him being obligated to give anything. And I ask Allah to raise the rank of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and to protect his Muslim nation. I testify no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah, the one without a partner, the one without an equal, the one without a similar, the one who is unlike anything in the universe and nothing in the universe is like Him. He has no father, no mother, no sister, no brother, no son, and no daughter. He exists without time and place because He is the creator of time and place. He does not reside above the throne and He is not attributed with fatigue, like the Jews say. Our Lord is glorified beyond any imperfection that the non-Muslims attribute to Him. Whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah Ta'ala does not resemble that, and whoever attributes an attribute in the creations to Allah is outside of Islam. And I testify that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the son of Abdullah, the son of Abdul Muttalib, the son of Hashim, the son of Abdul Manaf, from the tribe of Quraysh, is the best creation of Allah, and His final prophet and messenger sent to all humans and jinn, and He is truthful about everything He conveyed of the revelation. Thereafter, remind ourselves to have the sincere intention for the sake of Allah in attending this session of Islamic knowledge. And we are grateful to Allah that we have been guided to Islam, because Islam is the greatest endowment, and we are grateful to Allah that we have been guided to the knowledge of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, which is the saved group. So continuing on with our subject matter, explaining the matan of Abī Shujā, which is a introductory book in the Islamic law according to the infrastructure of Imam al-Shafi'i. And it is a beginner's book, and it is widespread and taught all over the world. Every student of Islamic knowledge that learns the knowledge of the Islamic law formally, and under the school of Imam al-Shafi'i, radiyallahu anhu, they learn this book. This is one of the books that they learn, one of the first books that they learn. And we have been blessed to have a verified and authenticated and accurate translation in English, which is the first that I've seen. And so alhamdulillah, we will continue on with this. We're on page 206, and this chapter is called the prayer during fear, salaat al-Khawf. So there's a certain prayer that is done, which is when a Muslim is not able to, let's say, stay still in one place in certain scenarios. So it's going to mention these scenarios and the judgments that apply to them. The author said the prayer during fear has three cases. The first of them is for the enemy not to be in the direction of the Qibla. The Imam divides them into two groups. One group stands in the face of the enemy and one group behind him. He prays one rak'ah with the group behind him, and then they continue by themselves. So, of course, when it says the enemy, and it means when the Muslims are in the battlefield. So even in the heat of battle, still the Muslim is obligated to pray, and he wouldn't be, let's say, excused from missing the prayer. So this is one scenario, one way that it looks like for the Muslims to pray in this situation. So the first way is the Imam divides them into two groups. One group stands in the face of the enemy, yani facing the enemy, and one group behind him, yani behind that first group. He prays one rak'ah with the group behind him, and then they continue by themselves. And they move to face the enemy, and the other group comes. So these two groups, yani one of them, he faces the enemy, and the other one stands behind the Imam. The first group behind the Imam, they do 1 rak'ah and then they go face the enemy, while the second group comes and does another rak'ah. So he prays 1 rak'ah with the group behind him, the Imam, and then they continue by themselves and they move to face the enemy, and the other group comes. He prays 1 rak'ah with them, and then they continue by themselves, and he says the salam with them. The second case is for the enemy to be in the direction of the qibla. The Imam divides them into 2 rows and commences the prayer with them. Then when he prostrates, one of the rows prostrates, and the other row stands guarding them. When he rises up, they prostrate and catch up to him. The third case is to be in extreme fear and hand-to-hand combat. One prays however one can, walking or riding, facing the qibla or not. And this is out of emergency, out of necessity. So now we're going to explain that method. The author said, some scholars said that there are as many as 16 forms of praying during time of peril. Al-Shafi'i mentioned 4, but the author, Judge Abī Shujā, only mentioned 3. The prayer during time of peril is done for any of the 5 obligatory prayers. It can also be done for the optional prayers, but the author did not talk about this. One of the forms is if the enemy is in a direction other than the direction of the qibla, and another form is when the enemy is in the direction of the qibla, in which case the Muslims can see if the enemy is approaching to attack them. So when the enemy is in the direction of the qibla, that means the Muslims that are praying, they can see the enemy in front of them. If the enemy is in a direction other than the direction of the qibla, or if the enemy is in the direction of the qibla, but there was a barrier between the Muslims and the enemy that prevents the Muslims from seeing the enemy, in this case it is the same. So if the way that the Muslims are standing, the enemy is not in that direction, the qibla is that way, but the enemy is behind them, for example, or there is a barrier that prevents the Muslims from seeing the enemy even though the qibla is in that direction, then it would be the same case. So truly, it is not only whether the enemy is in the direction of the qibla or not, but whether the Muslims are able to see the enemy or not. The Muslims must be patient in fighting double their numbers. They are forbidden from fleeing the battlefield if their enemy is double their number or less. So, as an obligation, if the 2 opposing armies, they come to the battlefield. So when the Muslim army, when they get to the battlefield, and then the non-Muslims, they also get on the battlefield. If the number of the non-Muslims is double or less, then at that point it is forbidden for any Muslim to run away. So because that breaks the morale, and yeah, it's an enormous sin. But if it was the number of the non-Muslim army, if it was more than double, then here the Muslims have the option to strategically move themselves so that they don't get overwhelmed by that army, or to stay and fight. But in this case, we don't say that if a Muslim leaves the battlefield, then he would be committing an enormous sin. Only if their numbers were double or less. So if the number of Muslims was 200 and the number of non-Muslims was 400, the Muslims still have to stand and fight. So now we're going to mention the first scenario. In the first scenario, where the enemy is not in the direction of the qibla, or when there is a barrier preventing the Muslim from seeing the enemy, the Muslims will be divided into 2 groups so that each group can fight the enemy. The first group will be fighting the enemy while the other group is praying, and then they switch turns. So the Muslim group that is fighting the enemy would equal half or more than half of the enemy's number, while the other Muslim group is praying. For example, if the enemy is equal to the number of Muslims in the battlefield, and the Muslims were divided into 2 groups, in this scenario, the group that is fighting the non-Muslims would equal to half the number of the enemy fighters, while the other half of the Muslims can be praying. So one of the groups will guard those who are praying, preventing the enemy fighters from attacking their imam, and the Muslim fighters who are praying. The Imam and the Muslim fighters who are standing behind him praying find a place to pray that is out of reach from the enemy's arrows. The Imam can pray a complete prayer with the first group of fighters, and then the Imam can pray a complete prayer with the second group of fighters, as the Prophet ﷺ did in one of the battles. In this case, the second prayer that the Prophet ﷺ did was a nafil prayer, yani a prayer that was not obligatory. But for the followers, it was an obligatory prayer. For example, if the Muslims were 200 fighters in number, the Imam would pray the Dhuhr prayer 4 rak'ahs with the first group of 100 fighters, and then he would make his closing salam, and then the followers would do the same after him. Then they would go to guard the Muslims while the other batch of 100 fighters stand behind the Imam to pray the Dhuhr prayer 4 rak'ahs. The Imam can also pray in a different form. For example, if they want to pray the Fajr prayer, the Imam prays the first rak'ah in congregation with the first batch of followers behind him. After the Imam stands for the second rak'ah, the followers make their intention to separate from their Imam in their prayers, and they complete the rest of their prayer on their own individually. And it is sunnah for them to keep their prayer light. And it is sunnah for the Imam to keep the first rak'ah of the prayer light, and to make the standing of his second rak'ah lengthy by reciting the Fatiha and a long surah, to allow for the first batch of fighters to finish their individual prayers so that they can take up their positions to guard while the second batch of fighters stand behind the Imam and begin with their opening statement, Allahu Akbar. So the followers would be in their first rak'ah while the Imam is in his second rak'ah. The Imam prays this rak'ah with them and then sits for the tashahhud, whereas the followers do not continue sitting down with their Imam, which is done under normal circumstances. Rather, they stand to perform their second rak'ah without intending to separate from the Imam. The second scenario is when the enemy is in the direction of the Qibla and there is no barrier preventing the Muslims from seeing the non-Muslims, and the number of Muslims is large, allowing them to be in two rows. So for example, if the non-Muslims are 200 in number and the Muslims are also 200, in this case the Imam would form 2 or more rows. The one standing and the one bowing can see the enemy ahead, but the one in prostration cannot. The Imam would begin his opening statement, Allahu Akbar, with all of them, and the followers would all intend to pray behind the Imam in congregation. If the Imam goes down for the second prostration of the first rak'ah, some of the rows would prostrate with the Imam, while the other rows remain standing to guard those prostrating. Even if they had to stand in the i'tidal position for a long period, this is permissible in this case. When the Imam lifts up his head from the second prostration, along with those who are in sync with him, that is when the rows that were guarding go down to prostrate to catch up in following the Imam in the i'tidal position of the second rak'ah. The Imam would lengthen his recitation enough to allow the second group to catch up and for them to recite the Fatiha. The Imam would make the tashahhud with all the rows and would make the closing salam with all the rows as well. So here this is a strategic way. In both cases, the point is for the Muslims to be able to pray and also to be able to protect themselves. So when the Muslims cannot see the enemy, then the Imam, he divides them into two groups. The first group is guarding, and not praying, while the other one prays with the Imam. So the ones who are fighting, they wait until a certain point in the prayer to jump into the prayer. So the Imam, he starts the prayer, and there's a group of those who are praying with the Imam, and there's another group that are guarding them, fighting the enemy. So that group that is guarding, they prevent the enemy fighters from attacking the Muslims while they are praying. So they start the prayer with the first group. So the Imam either prays a complete prayer with that first group, and then when that first group is done, then the second group comes and the Imam prays a complete prayer with the second group. Because it's just a matter of the Imam praying twice. And so the first group prays with the imam, a full prayer. They do the whole thing together. And then they say Assalamu alaikum, they end the prayer. And then the second group that was guarding and they weren't in the prayer, now they come and pray behind the imam. So that's one way, one scenario of that. There's another way too, which is the imam takes the first group and he would make the closing salam, and the followers would do the same after him. Oh no, this is where we already mentioned that. The other way is the imam prays one rak'ah together with the first batch, and the first group of Muslims that started the prayer with him while the other ones guard. So he prays one rak'ah. When the imam stands for the second rak'ah, that group who's praying behind him, they intend to separate from the imam and they continue the prayer basically on their own until they say Assalamu alaikum. And then the second group that was guarding, now they start the prayer behind the imam while he's in the second rak'ah. So that's why he said the imam, it's sunnah for him to make his second rak'ah long. So that while the imam is standing, let's say for the second rak'ah, reciting al-Fatiha and let's say al-Baqarah, that first group that started with the imam, they're standing up for the second rak'ah and they're continuing fast. And they, go on their own, they go to ruku', they come up from al-i'tidal, they go to sujood, they sit, they do sujood, they sit, they recite the tashahhud, they recite the salaat al-Nabi, and they say Assalamu alaikum to end the prayer, and the imam is still standing for the second rak'ah. So once those who were following the imam and they finished on their own, now they leave, then the second group comes and they start the prayer now behind the imam who's standing for the second rak'ah, and so they pray with the imam. So he says here that they start with the imam while the imam is in the second rak'ah, he prays it with them, and then the imam, he sits down for the tashahhud. So instead of that second group following the imam in that, they just continue on their own. They do their second rak'ah without intending to separate from the imam, and then they finish the prayer. And so that is one way of praying the prayer when the Muslims cannot see the enemy. Either the imam prays the full prayer with one group, and then with the second group he prays another whole prayer, or he starts the prayer with one group, and then when the imam stands up for the second rak'ah, that first group, they finish the prayer on their own, and then the second group comes and enters the prayer while the imam is in the second rak'ah. So,
and then he continues his prayer, he does the tashahhud, and he passes his salam, while the second group does not break from the imam, and they go to the second rak'ah. Is that what I understood?
So when the imam sits for the second tashahhud, that second group, they stand up and pray their second rak'ah.
Normally we would sit with the imam, but in this case,
Until the imam says Assalamu alaikum.
they stand up and finish the second rak'ah, and then they just continue as if normal, and then the imam passes his salam.
They continue, for what I recall, is they continue until they reach the imam. And because he's sitting down, the imam, for the last tashahhud. So he's reciting the last tashahhud. So they continue until they reach the imam and they say salam together.
Oh, because the imam would be in the second one, and they would be in the first one when they jump.
They would be in the second one when the imam sits down. They stand up for the second one when the imam sits down for the final tashahhud.
And he doesn't pass his salam until everybody is sitting.
From what I recall is that, the imam, he basically waits until they are with him and then he says salam. But I'll double check it. Because he doesn't mention it here. No. But from what he said, without intending to separate from the imam, so that means that they're still following the imam.
But why would they, if they're not intending to separate them, why can't the imam just pass his salam? Why is he waiting on them?
I never heard like a reasoning behind it. From what I know is that that's the way that the Prophet ﷺ did it during the battle.
I asked because how would the men even know? They all finished and they're all sitting down.
I don't know how he would know, but like I said here, they keep on going without intending to separate from the Imam. And they stand to do their second rak'ah without intending to separate from the Imam. It could be from them, let's say, saying the recommended matters in between, bowing and coming up. So he would hear them say, for example, Allahu Akbar, Sami Allahu liman hamidah, Allahu Akbar, so he would know where they are. Possibly. That's one way, one practical way. But I'll get some details about it, about if the Imam would just say Assalamu alaikum on his own without them catching up to him, or he waits for them to catch up. And the second scenario is when the Muslims can see the enemy. So how do the Muslims pray then? Then they all pray together. And so the ones that are directly behind him, or the ones that are praying behind the Imam, some of the rows would go to sujood with the Imam, while the others, they remain standing. So the Imam goes down for the sujood of the first rak'ah. Some of the rows would prostrate with the Imam, and they would make sujood with the Imam, while the other rows remain standing to guard those prostrating. So if we picture it, there's the Imam, then there's the first row, then there's the second row. So the first row, they go down with the Imam, they make sujood. The second row, they don't go down for sujood, they stay standing. Even if they had to stand in the i'tidal position for a long period, and even if they had to stay standing from rising up from ruku' for a long time. Then when the Imam lifts his head from the second sujood, along with those who are praying in sync with him, then that's when the rows who are guarding, they go down to make sujood, to catch up and following the Imam in the i'tidal position of the second rak'ah, and the Imam would make the tashahhud with all the rows and would make the closing salam with all the rows as well. Because in this case, everybody can see basically. So it's during the time of sujood in which you need to have the eyes, let's say, or you need to have someone looking at the enemy. So in that time, the rows, the second row, let's say, stay standing up while those first, while the Imam in the first row are making the sujood. So that when they come up from the second sujood, now they're going to stand up for another rak'ah. Now those rows behind, they go to the sujood. So the first sujood, then they sit in the second sujood, and then they stand up, and they catch up to the Imam in the first row in the i'tidal. And they all say the closing salam together. And they follow the same process until the end of the prayer. So that one's clear too. So you have, let's say we're praying here, and like we're facing that way, and we have one row behind the Imam and another row behind that row. So let's say only 2 rows. So when the Imam goes to sujood, the first row follows the Imam. So they're exactly doing what the Imam is doing. The second row, they don't go down to sujood. They recite al-Fatiha, they went to ruku' and they came back up from ruku'. The first row goes to sujood, the second row stays standing up. And then the Imam sits from the first sujood, then he makes the second sujood. Then when the Imam lifts up from the second sujood, now that second row goes to their first sujood. And so on, until they get to the second rak'ah. Same thing. When the first row goes down to sujood, the second row stays standing until the second row finishes the second sujood, then the second row goes down to the first sujood, etc. Now the third scenario is when one is in extreme fear. Like for example, during hand-to-hand combat. This also applies when running away from a fire or a flood or a beast, like like a lion or a tiger or a bear, or a beast animal. It says here beast animal. It could be a typo. They only meant to say beast or animal, but they put both instead. It is not a condition for it to be only during an ongoing hand-to-hand combat. It could be that the fighting had started fighting safety or security from the enemy with that in any direction, one facing the Qibla, unless there was not enough time left for the prayer time. Fear from the enemy there. One would do what one can to bow or prostrate, bending one's back or leaning one's head forward more for the prostration than the bowing. They can pray in congregation while fighting, which is better than praying individually. They can pray while on foot or while riding an animal, while facing the Qibla or not, if one is unable to face the Qibla. The Muslim fighters are exempted from the many movements they make while praying when fighting the non-Muslims. They are not excused for making movements they did not need to make while praying, and they are not excused from talking or shouting, unless it is for an excuse like warning a Muslim from an enemy about to harm another Muslim. In this case, one must warn. However, the prayer is invalidated by that, and one must redo that prayer. One is exempted from the blood of others on his sword or dagger, whether it is a little or a lot. So in the heat of the battle, which is when these judgments are mostly understood, the Muslim prays however they can. And so in this case, since he's in the middle of fighting, he's waving a sword, he is punching, kicking, whatever. So those are obviously many movements, and as you know, among the invalidators of the prayer, under normal circumstances, are many movements. So here in this case, that is exempted, so it's overlooked. So that wouldn't be an invalidator if the Muslim fighter is moving a lot. But the shouting or speaking, other than the words of the prayer, are not exempted. So even though the movements are exempted, but not talking or shouting. So if the shouting was for an excuse, like warning a Muslim from an enemy, in this case, he has to do it, and it would invalidate his prayer, but he's not sinful, because in this case, he has to. Then he just has to redo the prayer. And as for the blood, as we know, normally, the blood of your own wound, if it's little, then it's exempted. And the blood of, and also a lot, of your own wound, a little or a lot, is exempted, as long as it doesn't, let's say, like travel down to the leg and it pools, under normal circumstances. And for under normal circumstances, the little amount of blood from someone else is also exempted. Even though that the blood is filthy, but if it's a little amount, whether it's from you or someone else, it's exempt. And if it's your own blood from a wound, then if it's a little or a lot, it's exempt, except if it becomes like, it travels down and it turns into like a pool of blood. Those are under normal circumstances. In the case of the fighting, then it's all exempt. Because you're going to have blood on your sword, blood on your dagger, blood on your clothes, your blood, somebody else's blood, so in this case it's all exempt. So that concludes that chapter. Any questions about that before moving on to the next one, which is the forbidden clothing and jewelry? No questions? Page 210, forbidden clothing and jewelry. It is forbidden for men to wear silk and golden rings, but it is permissible for women. Little gold and lots of it are equally prohibited. If some of the clothing was silk and some of it was cotton or linen, then wearing it is permissible as long as it is not mostly silk. That's the method, the explanation. It is forbidden for men to wear silk, or to wear gold rings, whether it is a little amount of gold or a large amount of gold, and whether or not the silk is, it says coarse or not. I don't know what that means. Maybe that's a typo. It says coarse, C-O-U-R-S-E. I'm not sure what that means. Here we have hard copy. But I don't know why it says coarse. Did they mean coarse as in C-O-A-R-S-E, like not smooth? I'm not sure. But the fact is, if it's actually silk, then we're not allowed to wear it. As men, we're not allowed to wear it or use it. So we can't have like a silk bed sheet or a silk blanket or a silk rug that we sit on, anything like that, if it's actually silk. Now, most of the things that they say silk nowadays are not actually really silk. It's synthetic. It's not the real silk, because real silk, it is very, very expensive. But if a person did have something that was really silk, like a silk shirt or silk underwear, a silk rug, a silk sheet, it would be forbidden for the man to use it. No.
What about
Boys? We'll see what he says. The prohibition is for men, meaning pubescent men. No. Yeah, no, for boys it's different. He's going to mention it, inshallah. For the gold, for sure, I know that for sure. For the silk, I'm pretty sure it's the same. And he's going to mention it, I think. It says, the man is prohibited from wearing a golden ring, but it is permissible for the man to wear a silver ring. In fact, it is sunnah to do so. It is permissible, however, for the man to have a gold tooth or a gold nose to replace the tip of his nose if it was cut off. So in the case of replacing a body part, like if somebody had their finger cut off or somebody had their nose cut off and they wanted to get a replacement, in the past they would use the gold because of the purity of the metal. It would decrease the chance for there to be like an infection or for rotting and stuff to occur. So they would use gold. Because other things like just regular iron or steel or copper, it is very susceptible for infection. The author said, the silk that is coarse, and then it says in parentheses thick. Let me see if it's, that's another definition of the word. For C-O-U-R-S-E. I don't see anything that is related to the meaning of thick. But if we say C-O-A-R-S-E, which is what I think it is, which is what I think what they meant. They're pronounced the same, but it's different stuff. Yeah, loose or rough in texture. I'm not sure. But anyways, they put in parentheses thick, so that's the meaning that they want. The silk that is thick is called dibaj, and the silk that is fine, thin, is called sundus. It is forbidden for men because silk has feministic characteristics, such as the softness and the like. It does not suit the masculinity of the man to wear it. This is why the guardian of a male child who is not pubescent yet can dress his child with silk clothing until he reaches puberty, because this young male child does not yet have the masculine characteristics. Some scholars said that what is permissible for the female is permissible for the male child. The restriction for men is not just for wearing. It includes any usage, such as to sit on it, to lean one's back on it, to use it as a bed sheet or to cover up with it, or to use it for warmth. What is meant with silk here is the real silk and not the manufactured silk that one finds nowadays in the marketplace. The real silk is the silk that is made from the silkworm. The silk that is made from the cocoon after the silkworm left its cocoon alive is called qaz. And if the silkworm died inside its cocoon, this silk is called ibraysam. Both are called silk. One can wear the silk out of need, haja. The need is less restrictive than the necessity, darura. So the silk can be worn out of need, haja, or out of necessity, darura. So we say a need, in this specific terminology, haja, it's referring to something that is less than an emergency. So there's something that is darura, emergency, this is necessity. There's something that is haja, need, this is less than the necessity. So for the silk, if someone has a need to wear it, a haja, then he is allowed in that case. And if he has a darura, then for sure he is allowed. An example of darura is if a battle is unfolding and one could not find something else to wear, so he wore silk clothing, which is sometimes worn during the battle because of its silkiness. It helps in preventing or reducing the cutting effect of a sword or the knife. An example of a haja would be to prevent lice or jarab from affecting the person. And let's say the person had some discomfort on his skin, some irritation. And so by wearing the silk, he would not feel that irritation. This would be a haja. Also, one can wear the silk to protect oneself from the harm of the cold or the harm of the heat. This would be for a haja. Likewise, one can wear the silk to protect oneself from life-threatening heat or cold. This would be for a darura. On the other hand, if a portion of the clothing has silk in it and the rest of it is made of cotton, linen, or wool, it is permissible for the man to wear it if the weight of the silk in that piece of clothing is equal to or less than the weight of the other materials. So if that garment or shirt or whatever it is was 50% silk, real silk, and 50% cotton, or 50% wool, or 50% linen, then it would be permissible to wear it, that in all cases. You wouldn't need a haja or darura for that. If one has doubt whether the weight of the silk equals to or is less than the weight of the other materials in that piece of clothing, the scholars had difference in opinion about that. Some scholars said it would be permissible to wear, and some scholars said it would not be permissible to wear. If the weight of the silk is more than the weight of the other materials, then it is forbidden to wear that piece of clothing for the man. As for the females, it is permissible for them to wear silk, or to use it to sit on, or to lie on, and to wear the gold ring. And also, gold jewelry. So, yes, young brother, for the boy that is not yet a man, he may wear the silk. And some scholars even said, for a boy that is not yet a man, he can wear what the females wear. And it was permissible for the females, permissible for the male child. Some scholars said that. No. Now we get to the funeral prayer, page 212. 4 things are obligatory for the dead. washing him, shrouding him, praying for him, and burying him. There are two who are neither washed nor prayed for, the martyr in battle against the mushrik, polytheist, and the stillborn, who did not cry loudly after being born. The dead is washed an odd number of times. There would be a siddim thorn, footnote 282, a thorny shrub in particular, either of two shrubs related to the buckthorn, Paliurus, also called Jerusalem thorn. Jerusalem thorn. That's I guess the scientific, the name, Latin name. It's a known plant in the Arab world, sidr. There would be a siddim thorn in the beginning of his washes and a small amount of camphor in the end. He is shrouded in 3 white shrouds, none of which would be a shirt or a turban. 4 takbirah are said. One recites the Fatiha after the first, makes salah on the Prophet ﷺ after the second, supplicates for the dead after the third, and says, Allahumma hadha abduka wa ibnu abdika wa ibnu abdika kharaja min rawhi dunya wa sa'atiha wa mahbubuhu wa ahibbabuhu fiha ila zulmati al-qabri wa ma huwa laqih kana yashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wahdaka la sharika lak كان يشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن محمدا عبدك ورسولك وأنت أعلم به منا اللهم إنه نزل بك وأنت خير منزول به وأصبح فقيرا إلى رحمتك وأنت غني عن عذابه وقد جئناك راغبين إليك شفعاء له اللهم إن كان محسنا فزد في إحسانه وإن كان مسيئا فتجاوز عنه ولقه برحمتك رضاك وقه فتنة القبر وعذابه وافسح له في قبره وجاف الأرض عن جنبيه ولقه برحمتك الأمن من عذابك حتى تبعثه آمنا إلى جنتك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. So the transliteration system that they put here obviously is very different than what is normally put. And there is a capitalization of the connected pronouns, which is something, never seen that before. But this dua is narrated from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The last part of it was سَعْدَهُ فِي قَبْرِهِ وَجَاءَ فِي الْأَرْضِ عَنْ جَنْبَيْهِ وَلَقِّهِ بِرَحْمَتِكَ الْأَمْنَ مِنْ عَذَابِكَ حَتَّى تَبْعَثَهُ آمِنًا إِلَى جَنَّتِكَ يَا أَرْحَمَ الرَّاحِمِينَ. So this is the whole dua. And one says after the 4th takbirah, اللهم لا تحرمنا أجره ولا تفتنا بعده واغفر لنا وله. So he says the dua and he makes salam after the 4th. The dead is buried in a cavity facing the Qibla, meaning a hole. He is gently slid head first, and the one who inserts him says, Bismillah wa ala millati Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He is laid on his side in the grave after it was made as deep as the height of an average man with his arms raised. The grave is raised and leveled and should not be built upon nor covered with gypsum. There is nothing wrong with crying over the dead without wailing while mentioning his attributes nor ripping the collar. His family is given condolences up to 3 days from his burial. Two dead people should not be buried in one grave except for a need and except for a necessity. Here we have a question. It says, if a man wraps himself in a garment that's made for the woman, wraps it around himself to cover for prayer, is this prohibited? He doesn't wear it like a dress or like the women, but he uses the garment made as a dress. Never heard that before. I would need to ask about that now.
My son says when he wears short and he takes his skirt, he put it on just to cover his knee when he prays. Because he don't want to go with long pants. Make it easy.
A shirt? It uses a shirt for that?
No, it's a skirt.
My
Oh,
prayer
a
skirt.
skirt. Oh.
It's a prayer skirt.
No, for sure, no. The prayer skirt. If it was an izar, he could. But the prayer skirt, we need to ask about that. Because it's made specifically for the woman. But I'll ask about that, inshallah. But the izar, for sure, you can. He can wear it, and the izar is for both men and women. I'll ask about that, inshallah. Now for the explanation. He said, washing, shrouding after praying for and burying the dead Muslim is a communal obligation, fard kifaya, even if the dead Muslim was a baby, provided he was born alive, which is known by showing signs of life, such as crying or voluntary movements. So the first thing is, the one who is born, if they are alive, even if they die like the next minute, then we do all of these things. We wash them, we shroud them, we pray for them, and we bury them. This is an obligation for any Muslim that is born alive, even if they only lived for a short time. The Muslim who dies as a result of combat against non-Muslims, even if one non-Muslim and the stillborn who did not cry loudly after being born are neither washed nor prayed for. So if there was a Muslim who died as a martyr of the battlefield, he doesn't get washed and he doesn't get prayed for, but he does get buried and he doesn't get shrouded. And the Muslim, the martyr of the battlefield, he gets buried as he is. He doesn't get washed or shrouded or prayed for. And the stillborn means that they're born dead. They weren't alive even for one moment.
They don't get shrouded in their own clothes?
The martyr of the battlefield?
Yeah.
Yeah, they just get buried as they are. Yeah, so he was fighting, and whatever he was wearing when he was fighting, he got killed in it. He just gets buried like that.
Well, I understood that you shroud him with what he has on, and then if there's any parts that need dressing, then you use extra shrouding. That's not the case.
What is it? Shrouding with what he has on?
Like whatever he has on, he wears.
Yeah, just leave it on.
Right?
Yeah.
And then if there's like sleep or hair, then you use extra cloth. No?
No, he just if he, let's say, was wearing like a battle armor and stuff like that, a battle outfit, whatever he was wearing when he died, he's buried like that. Unless because of the way that he died or when he went through in the battle, some of his awrah got exposed, then you cover that up with something. You have a question, sir? No. And also the stillborn, they are not they're not washed or prayed for. And the minimum requirement for washing the dead is to remove the najas filth on the dead person's body, if any, and to use pure and purifying water to wash all of the dead person's body, skin and hair, even if it was thick. Once one time. However, washing it 3 times is better. So the minimum requirement for washing the dead Muslim who was born alive, is just to take any filth off of his skin. So if he had blood, to take it off. If he had feces or urine, to take it off. And then to just wash the entire body 1 time with pure and purifying water, and in the same way that we made ghusl here and while we're alive. That's the minimum. That covers it. And washing 3 times is better, just like when you're making ghusl while you're alive. Of course, there's a more elaborate recommended way to do it, which is 3 sets of 3 washes, 1 with the sidr, 1 with the just regular water, and then 1 with the camphor. So that's considered 1. Then 1, and then the same thing again, repeated twice. So it's 3 sets of 3 washes. So that would be the sunnah. And also, you make wudu for them. And basically, how you, right now in this life, like prepare for something like the prayer. Let's say you use the bathroom, you make istinja. Then you make wudu, with all the sunnah, using the siwak, clearing out the nose, clearing out the mouth, etc. Making a complete wudu. Then you do the ghusl, like how we mentioned, and you first, with the certain parts, like, doing the right side first and the left side, etc. Those are the sunnah. But the minimum is washing the whole entire body 1 time with water. And after removing the filth. So if there was any filth on his body, if there was any like blood stains on his body, you wash that off first, and then you do the ghusl. The minimum requirement for the shroud of the dead person is that which covers the whole body except the head of the muhrim, and the one who is in the Hajj pilgrimage. Except the head of the muhrim male and the face of the muhrim female for Hajj or Umrah, because these will not be covered. However, 3 wraps are used for the person who died leaving an inheritance exceeding his debts or had no debts to start with, provided he did not request not to be wrapped in 3 wraps. If the deceased Muslim had requested not to be wrapped in 3 wraps, then what is obligatory is to wrap him in 1 wrap, which covers the whole body. So some Muslims, before they die, they have a will. So if that Muslim in his will, he stated in his will, after I die, only wrap me in 1 sheet, then it is, and you go by his will, and you follow his will. Because that's what he advised before he died. But if he did not leave a will and his inheritance covers the funeral cost, then in this case we have to wrap him with at least 3 wraps. The minimum requirements for the funeral prayer for the dead are to intend to perform the prayer for that dead person, and that it is obligatory, along with specifying that it is the funeral prayer, as one is saying the opening statement, Allahu Akbar, while standing if one is able. So, same way how we pray like Dhuhr and Asr, you have to start the prayer by saying Allahu Akbar. And while saying Allahu Akbar, you have to have the intention. In the case of the funeral prayer, what is the intention? I intend to pray the obligatory funeral prayer for so-and-so deceased, either by mentioning his name or saying the one who the Imam is praying for, or this dead person that's here in front of us. And so he would intend that in his heart. So he has to specify that dead person, and he has to specify that he's praying the obligatory funeral prayer. That's for the intention of the funeral prayer while saying Allahu Akbar. So the funeral prayer has a different format than the Dhuhr and the Asr and the Maghrib and Isha. The Muslim in the funeral prayer, he says 4 Allahu Akbar, 4 takbirah. So the first is the one that he says to enter into the prayer. And after that one, he recites the Fatiha. This is the minimum. He recites the Fatiha. Then he says Allahu Akbar a second time, and he says Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Then he makes a third takbirah. He says Allahu Akbar a third time, then he makes a supplication for the deceased with something related to the hereafter. Oh Allah, widen his grave. Oh Allah, forgive his sins. Oh Allah, grant him paradise. But in Arabic, of course. And then he says, Allahu Akbar, a fourth time. And it's optional to say, Allahumma la tahrimna ajrahu wa la taftinna ba'dahu. And then he says, Assalamu alaikum. But after the fourth time, he says, Allahu Akbar. He's not required to say anything else, and he just says, Assalamu alaikum. It is recommended sunnah for the grave to be dug to the depth equal to the height of a person standing with his arms extended over his head, which is 4.5 cubits deep, and to widen it. Having the grave at such dimensions is recommended because it is the most optimal. It is an obligation to direct the dead person's chest toward the qibla, which is done by laying him on his side. It is unlawful haram to bury the dead in a mausoleum, which is a structure where a dead person is admitted into it before the body of the previous dead person has decayed. Such a place does not prevent the dead person's smell from dispersing. So for the grave, the minimum is a hole that is deep enough to protect that dead Muslim from being excavated by scavenger animals, and for the smell of his decaying body to be concealed. So the hole just has to be deep enough for that. The recommended is for the grave to be as wide as an average man standing with his arms out, and as deep as an average man standing with his arms up in the air. And for the widening, it just say it has to be widened, not necessarily with the arms extended. It says there is no harm with crying over the dead person without wailing or lamenting. Wailing means to loudly eulogize the deceased and enumerate his good qualities. So basically they're like sounding like in a crying voice, and they're saying, oh, he was so good, oh, he was such a good person, oh, they were such a good person, oh, they did this, oh, they did that, oh, they did this, like while crying. Or while it's like a sing-songy voice. It's not really like crying, it's like, they were so good, they were so good, like that. This is haram to do. And the other one, the lamenting, footnote 286, to scream voluntarily in a way that reflects panic and impatience upon the death of a person. So this lamenting is just literally like screaming out loud. Like the person is like screaming, and they're not even saying words. They might slap their face, they might rip their shirt, they might take like the dust off the ground and like throw it on their head. They might do all sorts of things, so that's haram too, voluntarily doing that. Some people, they do that while they're able to control themselves. They just want to, I guess, show that they really care, they love the person. This is, the Prophet ﷺ said, there are two sounds that are damned in this life and in the hereafter. And one of them he named a flute during a celebration, and the other one he named the lamenting. And the person does when somebody dies, while they're able to control themselves. Sometimes the person is overwhelmed, meaning like he's not really controlling himself, and he can't control himself. This is not, the person's not accountable for that, because it's really not by his choice. Like if somebody's crying really hard and they can't stop themselves, they're not sinful for that. But some people, they just do it to be over dramatic or to show that they are, that they really cared about the person. It says the family of the deceased is given condolences up to 3 days from his burial. 2 dead people should not be buried in one grave except for a necessity. For the condolences, And it's 3 days from when that person is buried. And what it means is to say like specific statements, for example, to the Muslim. You say, for example, may Allah increase your reward, and may Allah, make you grieve with grace, and may Allah forgive your deceased, and may Allah grant you patience. So that's for the Muslim to the Muslim. You say that. Now it's sunnah to do that, gender to gender. So a man says it to the man, and the woman says it to the woman if they're strangers to each other. If they're not marriageable to each other, then obviously they can say it regardless of the gender. But it's not sunnah, for example, for a man to say the condolences to a female family member of the deceased if they're not marriageable. If they're marriageable to each other, then it's not sunnah in that case. And 2 people should not be buried in one grave except for necessity, like if there's no more room. Like there's no more room in the graveyard, and there's no other place to bury that person, then they can there. And alhamdulillah, by that we have finished the chapter of the prayer. We'll see if we'll do the chapter of fasting from this book. It is, it's a very summarized, but it is beneficial at least to take it straight from a book of the Islamic law. So we'll skip over the zakat. The chapter of fasting is not very long, and maybe a couple pages. So I guess we'll do that. So we'll do the chapter of fasting because Ramadan is coming up. And then we'll see what chapter we do after that. You can take, maybe we'll take a poll, a vote. There's transactions, each chapter for each different transaction. But some of them are just like one page, just like one sentence. So I don't know, you could do that. You could do immediately after transactions. After the transactions is similar to it, but it's reviving unowned land. Then there's gifts, the chapter about gifts. Then the lost item, which is kind of like transactions. The abandoned child, which is only like 2 pages. Then the inheritance. This could be really beneficial because many people, they don't even take this information at all. Like how the inheritance works. So if you're good at fractions, it's very, very, very nice. Very, and it's fun. It's very fun to figure out all the equations. It's just fractions. The shares are like half, a fourth, an eighth, 2/3, 1/3, 1/6. Very interesting. And then after that, after the inheritance, the will, and then the marriage and divorce. You have something? You have a question? So I don't know. We'll find out. After the rules of marriage, there's everything that's pertaining to marriage, and then there is the section of assault. The different types of assaults, what you pay if you kill someone. Then there's a chapter of the punishments, different things. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. There's no question, we'll conclude. طيب نهلل لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. ربي اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. بارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم.